In the last lesson we showed how with just one simple shape we could play along to a 12 bar in the key of A using open shuffle patterns. In this lesson we're going to adapt the same basic principle to show you how we can play along in other keys, the commonly used keys of E, C, D and G major. Now if you've gone through any of our blues courses you'll be very familiar with the 12 bar blues in the key of E. In this key we use the chords E, A and eventually either B or B7. Here's a useful rule of thumb when you're playing along with pretty much any blues based sequence in a major key. Seventh chords and major chords are pretty much interchangeable. So the only reason I tend to use B7th when I'm in the key of E is it's easier to play than the bar chord of B major. I think for the purposes of this lesson we'll think of it as just E, A and B major. Now in the last lesson we already covered the E shuffle pattern and the A shuffle pattern, so let's just look at how we deal with the B chord. Here's the B major scale, and right away you can see why playing an added sixth shuffle pattern is a bit of a problem with this chord. We can't easily add the sixth note by replacing the fifth note in the same way we've done with the E and A chords. So our B major scale goes from here. So that's B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp and open B. So you can see we've got the fifth note, 2, 3, 4, 5 there, no problem with that, we can combine that with the root note there. But adding the sixth there is really a bit awkward. So we don't even attempt to do it like that. Now there's a couple of ways around this problem, but here's the one that's easiest to play. First we extend the scale downwards by thinking of the key note B at the second fret on the A string, not as note 1 but as note 8 in the scale, and working back down to locate notes 6 and 5 in the lower octave. So here's our B note, which instead of thinking of it as note 1, we're now going to think of it as note 8 and go down to note 7, note 6 and note 5 in the major scale. 8, 7, 6, 5. So now we can combine the fifth note with the root here like this, and change the fifth to the sixth like this. Now because the sixth note here is in the lower octave, we refer to this as an inverted shuffle pattern, the root note being the highest note of the pattern rather than the lowest. Still works exactly the same way. And here's the diagram just to show you that pattern. Remember, we're always playing the root and the fifth together and adding the sixth in a sort of rocking, to get the rocking effect. But notice again, if I use those two fingers, it's very easy to get that open D coming in, which sounds pretty horrid. So it's better to bar that across like that, so that that finger can just touch the D string to kill it, sort of mute it out. And then what we've got is a clean note, and a dead note. And then there's no danger of that open D creeping in. So that's another little useful tip. So let's fit that into a typical 12 bar in the key of E. Nice and slow to begin with. Play this along with me, starting with E. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Once again, we've made 3 backing tracks available in sort of slow, medium and fast speed, so you can practice against those to get a feel of using this in its proper context. Okay, so let's now move on to the key of C. Now, C is a very popular key for rock and roll, especially if you're playing along with a keyboard player. Most keyboard players find the key of C the easiest to play in. So the C chord itself, one way of playing that is exactly the same way as we've just played the B chord, simply by moving it up a fret like this. So here's our added 6 B added 6 shuffle pattern. With our B root note there, move that up to C and play exactly the same pattern, and we get a C added 6 shuffle pattern. But I have to say that's not my preferred way of playing it. This is what I prefer to do. From the diagram you can see the whole of the normal open C chord shape, showing the position of the root, the 5th and the 3rd notes making up the chord. But you will notice we've added the blue coloured 6th note at the 2nd fret on the G string. This is the note we add and subtract to make our shuffle rhythm. Now, not everyone finds this easy, and there are several options you can try out to get the best possible sound in the easiest possible way. The purest sound is got by muting out the 3rd note. So when I'm playing, I'm actually folding that finger over to get my 6th note there. C, D, E, F, G, A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in that action of folding that over, I'm also muting that note, so that this string is dead, while this one is sounded. Now that takes a fair amount of practice, and a lot depends on how thick your fingers are. Some people simply physically can't do this. That's absolutely fine, there are other options. But if you can do it, literally just fold that finger over. If you find that when you do that you can't mute that string and you actually include that note, it really isn't the end of the world, because that's a perfectly obviously legitimate note in the chord of C. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that point. Now in the 12 bar in the key of C, we'd want to move up to the F chord next. You can see that this is a basic F chord shape with the 6th note of the scale added using the pinky like this. So we've got our basic F chord played like that, with the top string either sounded or muted but not left open. We don't want the F major 7th creeping in, either that or that is preferable. And the note we're altering is the 2nd string here with the pinky on the 3rd fret. Again, whether we include that note or not is pretty immaterial. Ideally it should be muted, but it doesn't matter if it sounds. I would leave my finger on there because it's better that it sounds as that note than as an open G. That would sound horrid. This sounds okay. And if it's muted out altogether, hardly any difference. So I would just simply play the F chord, add the little finger there. Two possibilities for the G chord. A lot of the time I find it simplest just to use the same shape as the F and simply move it up a couple of frets. So you've got the F shuffle like that and just take that up 2 frets for the G chord. But sometimes you want a bassier sound, and the best option for that is to use a more sort of ordinary open G chord idea, and that looks like this. This is actually pretty similar to the C chord, and the same attention has to be paid to the 3rd note, which this time is on the A string. So that's this note here. We want to make sure that this is either sounded as an A, beg your pardon, as a B, i.e. the 3rd note of the key of G, or muted when we fold that finger over to add the 6th there. So either sounded or fold it over in such a way as to keep it muted. Those are both okay, but lifting your finger off it isn't quite so good. We don't really want that open A sounding in there. So these shapes may take a bit of sorting out because I think they're a little bit more difficult than the ones we've been working on so far. My advice is to, as quickly as possible, home in on one way of doing each of the shapes, work out which is best for you, that suits your particular shape and size of fingers, and then stick with that for now. Then work at getting the changes from one shape to the other nice and quick and nice and smooth. Once you can do that, start working against the backing tracks, which again we've supplied in 3 different speeds. Here's a little look at working against the backing track in the key of C at 160 beats per minute. That's the fastest speed, and if you can keep up with me on this one, you're definitely ready to rock and roll. Shapes are pretty much all you're ever going to need to play along with anything that you're going to use open chords for. We've specifically covered the keys of A, E and C major. We've actually covered all the chords we need for the other 2 chords keys that we're likely to work with as well. In the key of D, we would use the D major added 6th shuffle pattern, G and the A. In the key of G, we'd use G for our key chord, C and D. So we've got all 5 keys covered. On the Secret Guitar Teacher website you'll find 3-speed backing tracks for all these keys. You'll also find tab printouts of all the chord sequences for the 12 bars in all these keys as well. So that just about wraps it up for open shuffle patterns for the time being. But that's not the end of the story. We're also going to need to learn movable shuffle patterns so we can play in the less commonly used keys. A good example being Johnny Be Good, which was originally written in B flat major. So that's what we're going to tackle in the next lesson. And once you've worked your way through that, I think it's safe to say you'll be able to provide a pretty decent rock and roll accompaniment to anything in any key. Right, so I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.